Hi there. In this short video, we'll discuss authentication from the client-side perspective. We'll show you how you can access Weaviate with various authentication setups. To do this, we'll use the Python client with Weaviate instances from Weaviate Cloud Services, which is also called WCS. But please note that the principles are the same for other clients and Weaviate instances running in other ways, such as with Docker or Kubernetes. Let's get started. First, let's take a look at WCS instances that we'll be using. Okay, here we are at my WCS dashboard. You can see that I've got 3 Weaviate instances here, one of which is a standard cluster and the other 2 being sandbox instances. WCS clusters come with different authentication options depending on the type. So let's click on the Details button here to see cluster details. You see a lot of useful information here, including the URL and the Weaviate version. What we want is the authentication information, and we can get that by clicking on this button here. That'll show the API keys. Now, we'll be using these to log in later. You'll notice I've hidden mine here, and that's because you should treat these API keys like your passwords, as they can be used to provide access to the corresponding Weaviate cluster. Note that this cluster provides 2 keys, admin and read-only. You can probably guess how they're different, but we'll also show you later on. On the other hand, this sandbox instance is set up to not require authentication. This is obviously not secure, and it's only available for sandbox instances as an option for easy experimentation. Lastly, let's look at the other sandbox instance. This one is set up with authentication. This is the default option when you create the sandbox, and if we look at the API keys, you'll notice that it only includes an admin key, as the read-only key is only provided on production clusters. Now that we have the authentication information, let's see how we can use these with a Weaviate client to interact with a Weaviate server. Okay, I've got a Jupyter notebook here to demonstrate connecting to 2 of the Weaviate servers you saw earlier using various authentication methods. We'll use the public sandbox and a production instance that requires authentication. We'll define the URLs here like so, and let's start with the anonymous access. The public instance requires no user credentials, so all we need to access it is the URL which we defined earlier, and the client should be ready to go. Great. Now, what happens if we try the same thing on a non-public instance? You can see the client throws an error as it's not able to access the server. And if we look through the error message, we see that it's due to the lack of login credentials. So let's take a look at how we can provide these credentials. We'll create multiple instances of the client here, so we can compare them at the end. The first option we'll look at is using the API key. When we're passing login credentials, we need to pass an additional argument through the auth client secret parameter. For the API key, you should use the auth API key class as shown here, and the key specified as a string. Here I've got it saved as an environment variable, but you can pass it in any way. Generally, it's more secure to have your script read keys or passwords like this, or from a file, so that they're not exposed in scripts or notebooks that might be shared. And now we're able to access the instance, unlike before where there was an exception. Let's try the same with username and password. This uses a standard protocol called OIDC, or OpenID Connect, which is a little more complex under the hood. Weaviate instances and WCS are configured to authenticate users based on their WCS credentials, so you can just pass them on like so. Notice here that I'm using a different class called authClientPassword and passing on my WCS username and password. These credentials could be used for any of my WCS instances, whereas each API key will be unique to that particular Weaviate instance only. And lastly, let's instantiate a client using a read-only key. You saw earlier that production instances come with a read-only key, so that's the key that I'm using in this example. You can see that just as before, the client is ready to go. Let's test them out to see if they all work as they should. We'll begin with a simple query. We'll set up a dictionary of the client instances that we've defined so that we can loop through them. And here, we'll just go through the loop to retrieve one object with each client instance. And you can see that each one is able to retrieve data from Weaviate. Now, we'll try writing to Weaviate using the same process. Here I've got a helper function defined, so we can create a class and just confirm that it's been added. We delete it again once I've confirmed that it's been successfully added. We'll run this function in a loop. Here I've also set it up to catch any exceptions that might get thrown. And when we run the cell, we see that it works for 3 out of the 4 instances that we've built, but one of them throws an exception. Predictably, it's the read-only client that's thrown the exception, because as the name suggests, it's not allowed to make modifications to the Weaviate server. That's it for our demo showing you how to log into or authenticate against Weaviate with the Python client. As you saw, it's important that you use the correct authentication configuration to match how the server is set up, and by using the right configuration classes. And keep in mind that different identities can have different levels of authorization or permissions, so make sure to authenticate with the appropriate credentials. For more information, you can also take a look at our documentation to see how you can use different clients for authentication, or to learn how to create instances on WCS. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.